In February of 2020, while the COVID-19 pandemic was beginning to sweep its way across the globe, the most recent report of the Unitarian Universalist Association Commission on Institutional Change was completed. This commission, or COIC for those of us who like acronyms, was convened 3 years earlier in 2017 and were charged with the task of conducting an audit of the power structures and to analyze systemic racism and white supremacy culture within the Unitarian Universalist Association. They titled their report, Widening the Circle of Concern. The concern being that Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQIA, differently abled, poor, and others who have historically been and continue to be marginalized are not being heard or seen within our UU organizations and congregations. Right about the same time, the Article 2 Study Commission was formed to consider the possible amendment to the UU principles to add an 8th principle that addresses racism. The issue of white supremacy within our open and affirming religious tradition could not hide anymore. The whole system was broken open and has begun to shift. Before diving in deeper, let's go back a little bit to look at what were the signs by discussing who was showing up to become members of our churches. Thinking back to pre-pandemic days and now setting aside the multi-level platforms of hybrid church, who are the people who would be at church each week? Are people visiting for the first time each week? Where are potential new members coming to Unitarian Universalism from? Is it different religions or different cultures? The answer to most of that is no, or we don't know. What is going on? One answer may be found in a reading a seminary friend of mine shared on Facebook a couple of weeks ago. It's a few paragraphs written by Pastor Laura Green. And after I read them, I immediately sent her a message thanking her for what she wrote, and I asked permission to use it in today's service. She replied and graciously said, of course. Her words speak to one part of our problem. She wrote, our white mainline churches want new members far more than people want to become members of our white mainline churches. There just simply are not thousands of people out there just waiting for an invitation to serve on committees, hang out in a church fellowship hall, and join us for the kind of worship we prefer. If people wanted to be a part of our churches as they are now, they would be. They wouldn't have left. So we have a choice. We can either accept our dwindling budgets and numbers, or we can ask if there is something we could be that potential members would value. There is a huge cultural divide between those who have stayed in our white denominational churches and those who have left or never come. Which is more important to us, our church culture or the people who are alienated by it? My experience is that there are deeply marginalized people who would love a congregation to truly welcome them in, but we insist on doing it on our terms, not theirs, which is further alienating. There are also people who would love a spiritual community in which to ask deep questions, learn from what is ancient, create what is new, and work together for justice. It's telling that they are not interested in our congregations. Can we accept and mourn that the church culture we like is something we have to give up if we want a vibrant community of faith? My suspicion is that if we can do this, our faith will be revived and deepened by those who will join us. We will lose a little comfort of what we have known, but we will gain something so much more, abundant life. Pastor Laura Green, I didn't know her before I read that, and I did a little research on her. She is an openly lesbian, profoundly liberal minister in the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. She has been called too radical and even heretical by some in the ELCA for her very outspoken ministry of inclusion. But she is making noise in order to make change. As I read her words, I was reminded of a sermon I had heard years ago given by Reverend Karen Hutt about how Unitarian Universalism needed to step outside of the Protestant box and do church differently. That was the first I'd heard of this idea. My prior organized religious worship experience had been one that did not change from week to week, did the same thing at the same time every week. And I thought, wow, you mean that we, meaning the collective UU faith, have the power to choose a theology, to choose a way of worshiping, and we can choose who we want to be in the world? Wow. What a way of exploring that free and responsible search for truth and meaning we like to talk about. Of course, this was in the years that we, the collective UU faith, had begun to take a good hard look at ourselves, and we didn't like what we saw. Looking beyond the Protestant style of worship and the quote-unquote traditional Sunday morning worship, Wednesday night church meeting format is a much deeper problem. Pastor Lura's words push towards the why our churches, not just Unitarian Universalist churches, but mainline churches of every denomination, are having trouble with membership. Values and actions are not matching up. We need to make a shift. One of the core values that many UU churches express is how welcoming they are. Hospitality is a true and practiced virtue. I'm not going to deny that when I first stepped foot inside a UU church, I was welcomed by an elder of the congregation who met me with a smile and asked me who I was and how I found them. She even sat with me during the service, kind of like a guide. And after the service, she introduced me to other members of the congregation who all asked similar questions. Where are you from? How did you find us? What do you do? Well, I very much appreciated this sort of being taken under the wing, so to speak. I do think about what that welcome might have looked like if I wasn't a white woman. Would I have had the same experience? What happens when people of color visit our churches? These hard questions lead us to the chapter entitled Hospitality and Inclusion in the COIC report, Widening the Circle of Concern. They write at the beginning of the chapter, our work concluded that Unitarian Universalists continue to repel many of the people who would otherwise provide resources to fuel our continued growth. Though our predominantly white congregations and organizations may see themselves as welcoming, without particular practices, they continue to mirror the kinds of harm done to people of color and other marginalized groups in larger society. On this note, we stress that when we are inhospitable to one group, for example, Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, others who experience marginalization notice, and our sacred spaces become unwelcoming for them as well. This is also well illustrated in testimony given to the COIC from a white queer UU lay leader who had been elected to the board in a former congregation they attended, who had begun asking the hard questions. They said, I began asking questions about why our congregation was so predominantly white, despite being located in a very diverse area, and how we might start to change that. There was pushback by several prominent white members. They spoke about being the last white person in their neighborhood, or how they have been wronged by racial minorities, and how they like coming to a place where almost everyone was white. One person said they came to this particular congregation to escape diversity. Now, if that was me there hearing those words, part of me would simply want to just get up and walk away from that conversation. But that would not resolve any of the underlying issues. The time has come to have the difficult conversation, to address answers like this, but with compassion and understanding, to develop a kind of listening for all the voices in our congregations, the people already there and the ones yet to be that we need to hear. The hard work of change is upon us. A first step could involve taking a hard look at what language, both words and visual language, are being put out for all to see about our church. When looking for a faith community, most people first look to the church's website for more information. They may see the covenant of that church posted there. They are usually prominently placed within church websites. Now, what does that covenant say, and is it inviting people in? The UUA has provided a study guide or discussion packet for widening the circle of concern that has an exercise that individuals and small groups can do to look deeply at their congregational covenant. Covenants are living, breathing documents that need to change as our systems change. We need to ask who would feel most welcomed by the church covenant and who would not, and most important, ask why. If the word we is included, who does that mean? Are phrases using the words others or surrounding community prominent? Who exactly are the others? Define what the surrounding community is. Expanding outwardly from the covenant, the COIC report offers some recommendations also to radically shift the approach to hospitality and inclusion. They recommend new structures to provide leadership education to UU leaders that are needed and should include multicultural practices as foundational. The basic skills in welcoming the personhood and gifts of all people need to be learned. It has to be understood that my experience in Unitarian Universalism and religion in general is not the same as somebody else's, especially people of color. Over the past decades, affinity groups have grown and shaped the direction of Unitarian Universalism. Within our congregations, do we learn about the work of Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism, or BLUE, and what they're doing to shape communities of color, or the leadership training offered by the Diverse and Revolutionary UU Multicultural Ministries, or DRUM? If so, how is the message getting across? What amazing work can be done within a congregation who takes the steps to learning how to be a diverse, inclusive, and equitable congregation by following the leads of BLUE or DRUM, or any of the other many groups working hard to change our tradition for the better. The COIC also recommends that support be given to marginalized groups to gather in conferences and meetings with other Unitarian Universalists who share their life experiences. Experiences that white, able-bodied, straight, cisgendered, moneyed UUs do not share. There's a group of people within our UU faith that we haven't spoken about yet, but who often feel alienated or disenfranchised from our congregations. A final recommendation the COIC gives in this chapter is to provide resources to promote young adult and youth convenings that include support and caucusing for those with marginalized leadership. It's a cliche, I realize, but it's true that the youth are the future. Take a look right now at leadership within the UUA, at the array of groups working hard to promote justice, and the faces you see are young. Not only just youth, but they are youth of color, young adults with disabilities, LGBTQIA, and youth who come from poverty conditions. There is a responsibility to provide a pathway for them to learn and grow in leadership positions and in life. So we arrive at a foundational time in Unitarian Universalist and, in fact, world history. Nothing, and I really mean nothing, is truly the same now as it was 2 or 3 years ago. Nothing is going to make that reality come back. And to be honest, should it come back? Unitarian Universalism has been on the cusp of change for a long time now. And right now we have a chance to seriously create change. What a time. It's downright frightening because we don't know what's going to come out of all of this, come out of the pandemic. And it's also downright exciting because we don't know what's going to come out of all of this. This is a chance to make some very important and huge changes. As we widen our circle, we only have things to gain. To quote Pastor Luro once more, we will lose the comfort of what we have known, but we will gain something so much more, abundant life. This time, I don't have any particular question to pose other than what you might feel needs to happen within our church. Right now, MSUS is in a position of change, of great change, and future is wide open, and you could paint any picture you want of how you want MSUS to look in the future. What are your hopes and dreams for this? If you want to think about that, or we can discuss a little bit, we have some time.
Polly, I hope our name changes with a new building. I think it will provide a more welcoming place for everybody, not just those in the society.
Thank you, Polly, for your thoughtfulness on that. If there's anybody online who wants to share on Zoom, just go ahead and raise your hand and we'll call on you. Marie.
I would like to see more youth. We're talking about youth, Lisa, and by the way, I thought that was a wonderful sermon. But to have the youth doing more during the service, that's what I'd like to see.
Thank you, Marie. I agree with you on that. It's like Pamela has written in the chat is, can we really look for a new home that is not predominantly white? Insert ourselves in the communities we wish to serve. Excellent idea. Katie.
I am intrigued by the idea of what can we do, or what might it look like if our Sunday services somehow change, somehow a different format or different timing, or not the same every week. I find that really intriguing.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who take a lot of comfort in coming to a service every week and it being the same, but it does just open up so many possibilities to think about what potentially it could look like and how, it could work, it could not work, but it's exciting.
This is Bruce. One thing I'm thinking of is in goal setting and planning, one of the ways of doing that is making a picture, an actual drawing or photo of what we would like to be. I would like to see a picture of people of color sitting with us. I would like to see a picture of youth sitting with us. So the picture we see that we work toward is what one we can achieve. But if we don't know what to look for, all too often people say, this is what I don't want. And you can't grow from what you don't want. You can only grow from what you do want. If we want people of color, if we want youth, what can we do to develop that picture and hold that picture in our mind, in our hearts, and visually have it so we can see it and have that as your goal? So we need to have something to look forward to, not to move away from, but to move toward. We need to have a direction. We need to have a target. So what do we want, and what can we put on that target as our new image, as our new picture of who we are? Thank you.
I think because of time, we will wrap up our discussion, but please carry on the discussion after our time together today is done. Keep talking to each other, dream big, and do the work to get there. So I'll hand it over to Jamie for our offering.